want to talk about the next $2 trillion stock.
Let's do it.
$2 trillion, $2 trillion, those are benchmarks for publicly traded stocks. There's not many of them.
Yeah.
There's only a handful of them. So to be a $2 trillion stock, that's a big thing. I predict that Google is the next $2 trillion stock. Right now, and we're talking about market cap. Right now, it's about 1.725 trillion, and it's all-time highs, running beautifully, and it's been on a great run. We've talked about how we think it's one of the more underrated FANG stocks, underrated tech stocks. I put it in the watch list today. You know, I love this stock, and this is one that when you're thinking about stocks for your forever accounts, your investment accounts to buy and hold forever, this one doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion. They recently had an acquisition with a fintech company, a Japanese fintech company called Pring, which I thought was really cool moving into fintech space. We actually have another company that's adding things to their fintech portfolio that we'll talk about in a second. But I like this move. They want to increase their exposure internationally, specifically in Asian markets. I think this is a great move. But when you think about all that they have to offer and you look at, let's say just Facebook, which I'm not saying that Facebook doesn't have opportunities, but we talked about there's good thing that Facebook is doing as far as a diversification of business concerned.
Yeah.
Google does really well as far as diversifying their revenue streams, has exposure in multiple places. So Google has ad revenue, which is a dominant factor in their whole revenue mix. But YouTube, you think about YouTube, the opportunities there. You think about their search, the opportunities there. You think about just their services. I know you've mentioned travel, but like their suite services, so like Google Sheets, Google Docs, they're great.
Yeah.
They do all of those things that, you know, YouTube on its own could be a publicly traded company, and I think it could do really well. So I love what they do, not to mention Google Cloud. When you think about Amazon Web Services, their cloud services, Microsoft, Azure, Google doesn't get talked about enough, but it's right up there with those other two, and it's going to continue to gain customers and dominate. I believe that not only is Google the most underrated FANG, but I think it is the next $2 trillion company. And so you're aware, because it sits just over 2,600 right now. In order for it to be a $2 trillion company, the per share price needs to be at $3,025. So the question becomes, can it and will it hit $3,000, which will in turn make it a $2 trillion company?
I think if you look at Google as the number one search engine in the world.
Who's number two, by the way?
Who's number two?
Yeah.
It's YouTube.
Who owns YouTube?
Google.
All right, just checking.
So, like, that in and of itself is a big deal. So, not only its competition is also its second sister company, whatever you want to call it. So it's wild to see how actually underappreciated Google is. Even though it's almost like you're just expecting Google to just come in and crush it all of the time. So like to really take a deep dive into how the company is and what it's been doing, it really is something that actually you look at everything that they have going on, and it's still undervalued as hard as that is to believe. I mean, you look at something like Apple and the money they're bringing in and the sources of revenue that's coming into their business. Google's right up there with Amazon and all of the other FANGs, really. So I think that you're right. I think that Google could very well easily be the next one. And the fastest to 2 trillion, I think, could be Facebook. I'm going to put that out there.
Microsoft, we like Microsoft, let me be clear, but Microsoft, we've talked about their acquisitions and how they sort of dropped the ball on a lot of things. Like the best example is probably Skype. I don't want to say they did a poor job on LinkedIn, but they haven't really done anything with LinkedIn, in my opinion, that's made it competitive.
Teams sucks.
Teams is horrible.
Yeah.
And so you look at Google, and Google's the opposite. Google Drive, Gmail, all their services, to me, Google will replace Microsoft as far as when you're having that tech conversation.
Yeah.
And I think it already really has, but the slower adopter has been institutional, corporate. So I think you're going to see that shift happen, because even the video platform, Zoom is still king, but Google in business, it's, to me, the second most common used one. as far as what I've seen in business. And so I think that Google's really the only competition for Zoom, but I don't even think they want to be number one. I think their suite of services is best in class when you look at software.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
so you heard it here. Google is the next $2 trillion company. Holla at me. I probably should have checked who was closest to second because there's probably somebody who's at like 1.9. I'm going to say. Somebody asked, Alexander said, what price is it to buy? So why don't you talk about the technicals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So looking at it today, it's actually still flat on the day. We'll look at the chart here. I mentioned on the watch list that there's potential for this to pull back to like around 25.50. I would be surprised if we saw it correct all the way down there, just given everything that's coming up, especially with earnings about 2 weeks away. I would be surprised to see Google have any kind of substantial correction. But if it does, then I think that that's certainly a good opportunity to potentially scoop up some Google if it bounces off of that 25.50 area. But honestly, I think at this point, if you really want into Google, you just have to own it no matter where it's at.
And I have the numbers. Sorry, I should have brought this up. Should have been prepared for this. But there's only two companies, that's Apple and Microsoft, that are $2 trillion mark.
Yes, which Apple just did.
No. Well, Microsoft did it most recently.
I'm sorry. Apple just hit 2.5. Sorry.
So, yes. So Amazon is third at 1.875 trillion, and Google is fourth at 1.725 trillion, which is, that's going to be a tight race, and possibly Amazon could beat them.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, how many 2 trillionaire clubs do we have at the end of the year?
Ooh, that's a good question. So there's only 2 right now?
There's only 2. And there's only 5 that are really 1 trillion.
Facebook just hit 1 trillion, right?
Just hit 1 trillion.
So I don't think Facebook's going to hit it this year. I'll say 4.
I think I think so too.
I'll say 4.
And I think the bigger question is, and maybe we'll cover this at a different time, is the $1 trillion club, which is, because there's only 5 in the $1 trillion club, and number 6. Do you want to guess what company is number 6? You could probably guess it.
That's like not in the $1 trillion club yet?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Okay, it's a pretty obvious guess.
Netflix?
Tesla.
Duh.
660 million. So it's pretty far off from the trillion.
Yeah, and that's number 6.
That's going to be a nice race. That's number 6.
Yeah.